Well, hello everybody. I'm absolutely delighted today to be talking to Joanna Forbes L'Estrange, who, at virtually no notice, came and sang the soprano solo part in our Mass in Blue concert in Farnham Maltings on the 24th of March, and absolutely wowed us and the audience. And she's very kindly agreed to talk to me after the event. So, Joe, good morning.
Good morning.
Well, it's very nice to be able to talk to you. And I mean, why? I'm going to ask you the obvious question first. What were you doing on Sunday when the phone rang and you were asked if you could sing the solo part?
I was in my kitchen in Hertfordshire, where I live, holding my car keys, literally about to get in the car with my 18-year-old and my 16-year-old to drive them up to Bedford School, where they're at school, to watch them perform Haydn's Creation. So one of them was singing in the choir, and one of them was playing his violin in the orchestra. My husband, meanwhile, was going to be staying at home and joining me later. And then my phone rang, and it was Beth. And it was very funny. She said, "Oh, sorry to bother you, but our soprano is unable to perform a Mass in Blue, and we're wondering whether you might be able to step in." I assumed she meant in a couple of weeks or something. I said, "Yes, absolutely. When is it?" And I opened my diary, and then she said, "No, no, now. I mean, now." It was so funny. And, Alexandra, my husband, and I have been together since our teens, and we're both musicians. So we're just so used to this. And he immediately looked at me and went, "You do it. Say yes. I'll take the boys." So we just flipped the whole day. And suddenly I ran into my room, opened my concert dresses wardrobe, grabbed a blue dress, grabbed some shoes, grabbed a score, and threw it all in a case, jumped in the car, and the next second I was on stage with you, lovely lot.
And I mean, you really wowed us in the rehearsal because I think as Will had tried to say to us, because he came and took one of our rehearsals, and as Richard Pierce, our conductor, also was trying to get us to understand, this is a piece where you really have to let yourself go and
Oh
enjoy
yeah,
it. And I think,
absolutely.
for a choir like ours, which is used to singing more conventional pieces, and we're all it certainly took us out of our comfort zone initially. But I think when we saw you on stage, sort of just sort of moving around with the music and having a laugh and turning around and facing us. I think that really got us going, actually.
Good. Well, I feel very lucky because I do a lot of choir coaching myself. And so I know what it's like to be the person in charge of a choir. And I also write music, so I know what it's like to be the person who's written the music and what you want a choir um, to feel free to perform it, the piece that you've written. And I know what it's like to sing in a choir, having done that for most of my career. So I'm coming at a day like that from lots of angles. And I think that really helps because as soon as I stood on that stage, I just got myself into the mindset of all of you behind me, probably thinking, crikey, this is a bit tense, our soprano's gone sick and suddenly we've got this new person we've never met before and yikes. And so I wanted my body language and everything about how I was being on stage to make everybody realize immediately that they could relax because this is a piece I've performed umpteen times and recorded on CD, and I know it inside out and upside down. So I just wanted to convey that immediately. Everybody would go, "Oh, it's going to be fine," because I know from having coached choirs on this piece, because often when I'm invited to sing Mass in Blue at more notice than 4 hours, um, I am invited in a couple of weeks before the concert to rehearse the choir. So they get to know me and I get to know them so that we're comfortable, so that the conductor is comfortable, so that by the time the concert comes around, everyone goes, "Oh, hi, Joe," and they will know me. So I suppose what I was trying to do in that short afternoon rehearsal was quickly convey all of that so that when we got onto stage a few hours later, everyone thought, "Yeah, this is going to be fun." And it is fun music. And there's no rule that says that just because music is religious, it can't be fun. You know, those words, a lot of those words are absolutely joyous. The credo is my favourite movement of Mass in Blue. You know, I believe. It doesn't need to be, I believe in God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. How we often say it in church, very, very solemn. The way that Will has set it, you know that he really does believe it. I believe, credo in unum deum. And it's just so, so joyful. So, yeah, I had a ball, and you were all so welcoming and lovely. And apart from anything else, I grew up in Guildford. So, Farnham, you know, it felt like coming home in a little way.
Well, it was everything you said was how we experienced it. It was just fabulous to see that. Gave us a lot of confidence actually. And obviously, you know, you would always, I'm sure, do it without the score. But again, given that one of the main messages that we heard from Will was get your heads out of the score. To
Yes.
see you singing this thing at such short notice with sort of perfect recall was
Yeah.
again sort of inspirational to us.
Well, I'm so glad because I think choirs that perform without music or choirs like you that have performed with but looking up, it makes such a difference, not just for the singers themselves, because you always realize you know more than you thought you knew, don't you? You think, oh, I couldn't possibly do this without the score. But in my experience, if you say to a choir, let's do that next bit without the score, and they go, oh, they put them down and then they sing it and they go, oh, I didn't realize I knew that. And I always find that, and I love performing without music. That goes back to my Swingles days because we performed everything without music. I'm just moving my bag because my sister's dog has decided to join us. Hello, darling. Um, yes, so and I think performing without music is so lovely for the audience as well because they can see your faces and they can see your smiles, and there's no barrier in the communication. So I memorized it years ago, and it's funny because I'm clearly in the right profession because my memory for most things is appalling. I can't remember people's names. I can't remember dates that things happened, or I can't remember what I'm supposed to be doing the next day. If someone asks me on Monday, how did it go at the weekend? I invariably say, what was I doing? I can't remember. But I can remember music. So if I've memorized something, I never forget it. So it was just lovely. I mean, I threw the score in just in case, but I didn't actually open it because you know it's just it's in my brain now, and I don't think it'll ever leave me.
Well, it certainly, I think the tonic worked for us because, I mean, I don't think we've ever had as many people in the audience, friends, families, and others feeding back to us after the event. You know, we've never seen the choir with so much energy and enthusiasm. And in
Oh,
fact,
that's nice.
one of the audience has written a lovely review, which I hope will appear in the local paper. You know, which sort of says actually the choir looked as though they'd been doing it all their lives. You know.
Yes, but you did. You know, I've done this piece with a lot of choirs, but you really did have that wonderful and joy. There was a lot of smiling on stage, and I think that in itself is clever because if one person smiles, the next person smiles. It's a domino effect. I'm always saying this when I coach choirs that you need to be a positive force so that it ripples out. And if everybody feels that way, then it's just contagious. And then nobody, hello, my darling, I know you want to be in this interview too, don't you? I'm not quite sure how I can show. There she is. There's
I,
my
well,
darling.
that's a very lovely, lovely creature. I'm having to keep my cat at bay, who's very loud and not at all lovely when these things are happening. So, oh, your dog is very welcome. Sister's dog is very welcome.
She's adorable, and it's funny because I have cats, so I don't really know much about dogs.
Oh,
So in the early days, I was always a bit sort of unsure, but now we've got a good relationship, haven't we, my darling? So what are your opinions on singing and choral singing? So yeah, so I think that rippling effect, and you can see it when I judge choir competitions as well. You don't generally see the face of the conductor because they've got their back to you, but you can sort of tell what face they're doing by the faces that the singers are doing. And some of these youth choirs, you know, they come on and they're just grinning from ear to ear. And you know that it's because their conductor is doing the same. And I feel the same when I'm singing as a soloist with a choir. That if my body language is relaxed and I'm smiling, that theirs will be too. And it's a lovely feeling on stage, isn't it? When everyone's got that same sense of confidence and relaxation and communication. And then the audience picks up on it too. And that's what I think performance is all about. That's, you know, that's the difference between listening to Mass in Blue on a CD and going to hear it live.
I think when we put the interview I did with Will up on the on our website, I think the caption was, "It's all about the performance." You know,
Yeah,
it is all
yeah,
about the performance at the end of the day.
it really is. And the best, so I've had lots of feedback from audience members over the years, and not always positive, because not everybody's convinced about a jazz setting of the Mass. But the best one I ever heard was somebody who came up to me and said, I wasn't sure I was going to like this because, to be honest, I'm not religious, and I just couldn't really get my head around the idea of a Mass setting being jazzy anyway. But I came along because my wife persuaded me. And do you know what? Not only has it converted me to the piece, but I'm seriously thinking about faith now. And I thought, wow. And that's the thing, because what Will done is very clever, because the Mass ends with the Agnus Dei, the Lamb of God, and it's a bit, obviously, needs to come down in mood because of the meaning of the words. But after the Dona Nobis Pacem, after the Grant Us Peace, instead of ending it there, he does a reprise of the Credo, which I think is so clever. Not only because the audience recognises the music and thinks, oh, I like this bit, but also because we end on an up. And the very, very final words that the choir and I sing, as you know, are Credo. So you're left with this, I believe, rather than, you know, something more solemn. And it's just genius, I think. I'm a huge fan of the piece, in case you haven't noticed.
Well, I think we all are, and I couldn't agree more with your point about the ending. And I think that's a stroke of absolute genius, actually,
It really is.
to end in that way.
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, personally, the week before I had sung the Brahms Requiem, you know, which I always find a sort of amazingly powerful experience.
Oh, I
But I
love.
was actually quite surprised by singing the Mass in Blue, how it sort of got to me at a kind of emotional and spiritual level as well. So
Yeah.
I was going to ask you some bit more actually about this business of setting the words of the Mass to sort of jazz and gospel music, and you know, I wondered, you know, I was just thinking that sort of somebody was saying on the radio that you know the word Eucharist actually just is Greek for sort of giving thanks,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and you know actually what are we doing in sort of singing if we're not somehow sort of giving thanks for being
Yeah.
here and for creation and being alive and all the rest of it. I was actually listening this morning to a song thrush singing lustily outside my bathroom window, and I absolutely swear that she was singing et vitam venturi. You know, I mean, it's just sort of it's like a force of nature and happiness, really, isn't it?
Oh, isn't that lovely? I had a singing teacher years ago at Oxford who used to say, go for a walk and listen to the birds, because they do it right when they sing. It's just free and unencumbered and joyful. And I used to love that. And even now, you know, so many years on, 30 years on, I hear, when I hear birdsong, I hear her in my head saying, that's how to do it, just free and easy. That's lovely.
And you said, Joe, that you've obviously sung it many times, and we've all listened to your recording with the Sorry Singers, which is terrific. Um, but I wonder, have you sung it much? Sort of not in this country. Have you sung it around the world much? And do audiences react differently at all, depending on the environment?
Well, I've not yet sung it outside of the UK, but I gave the Scottish premiere of the piece, which was a huge honour, at the Edinburgh Festival in 2015, was it? About 10 years ago. And they loved it, but I think, I don't know, it was part of the Edinburgh Festival vibe. So I think people were coming into the church with an expectation of loving it. But no, I'd love to do it in the States, because I've toured a lot with various groups, particularly with the Swingle Singers when I was with them. But then since then with Tenebrae, I was with Tenebrae for 20 years, and we did a lot of touring. And there was something about the reaction of American audiences that I just love. They're much more likely to kind of jump out of their seats and kind of go, whoa, you know. And I guess that kind of, I like that because it's a bit more like I am in an audience.
Yes, I think
um,
it's always gone down well in the US, hasn't it? The massive.
yes, it has. So I'm longing to do it there. And I've got a good friend who I was in the Swingle Singers with, who now runs a choir in Montreal. And I know he's keen to do it. So I keep dropping very unsubtle hints about, well,
Well,
if you do Mass in Blue, you know who to call. Um, because that would just be really fun. And it's, you know, it's a wonderful piece, and it's 20 years since Will wrote it, and it's really stood the test of time. And so many choirs have done it, and he must be just thrilled. Although when I said to Will, "Do you realise it's 20 years?" I think it was last year. I phoned him up, and he said, "Oh no, don't. That makes me feel old."
I must admit, one of the bits I found most moving was when he did that little improvisation leading
That's
into
our
the
Sanctus.
Sanctus, isn't it? And
Yes.
you know, as he explained it to the audience earlier, you know, this is pure improvisation. This just comes from within. And
Oh, it's
I thought it was beautiful, and I thought it was incredibly moving, and a very well a good way of leading into that movement.
Oh, I totally agree. It's so clever because I was listening to it, thinking, I wonder how he's going to get into the key for the Sanctus, and just hearing his mind work as he improvised. Because my son's a jazz pianist, so I hear a lot of jazz improvisation at home. So, and I've become fascinated by it. So I was sitting there, knowing that I wasn't in the Sanctus movement, just able to relax completely into Will's improvisation, and it was just stunning. And then when he ended with that octave oscillation, and I knew that you were about to come in, it was a magical moment. He's so clever. I love that combination that you get in some composers. It's the same with my husband, actually, that they're classically trained, but they're jazz musicians, and you get this wonderful convergence of the two styles. And I just think we're so lucky to be in the midst of these people, these brilliant musicians.
And Joe, you've talked about writing choral music, and you've obviously written a great deal of choral music. And I've had a quick look at some of the things you've written. It's a very impressive portfolio you have there. And I know you're also involved with the Royal School of Church Music, RSCM, and you were at an event in the House of Lords recently on their behalf. Tell us a bit about that.
Yes, that was really interesting. Well, the RSCM have been publishing my church music for the past 10, 15 years or so, and they're wonderful, wonderful publishers. And they are celebrating their centenary in 2027. And so they've created an amazing strategic campaign to enable the flourishing of music in churches and cathedrals, because as we all know, it needs a lot of funding and a lot of support, and it's something that the RSCM cares really passionately about, is keeping music alive in church. And so they asked me, as one of their composers, to give a keynote speech to a lot of very eminent people from the choral music world, the church, well, no, the church music world, really, at the House of Lords, which was a huge honour. So I found myself standing with the great and the good of the church music scene. And I just spoke for a few minutes about why music in church is so integral, not just to the worship, but to the whole meaning of, you know, they call it music as mission. It's not an add-on; it's part of our church life, really, particularly in this country, but also around the world. And how we can preserve it, how we can encourage younger people, younger families into church, how we can keep organists and choirs going in these churches. And it was, yeah, it's been, gosh, I spent so long writing the speech um, because I really, it's something I care so deeply about, and I felt quite privileged really to be asked to talk about it. And it's just a springboard, it's a starting point to get people thinking about it. And I think I was making a point that if we don't do something now, we run the risk of it fizzling out. And it's very difficult to persuade a lot of people how important it is and why it's important, especially if they haven't been involved in music themselves. And what we're finding now, without wanting to get too political, is that a lot of the people in positions of power are making decisions about axing music in schools and axing music provision and axing choirs left, right, and centre, and axing church choirs and organists and ugh. But they're the product of a generation who didn't necessarily have music in school unless they opted for it or unless they were privileged and could pay for it and went to a nice, a school with lots of music. But it's a real worry because if those people are making those decisions without realizing what they're actually destroying, then it's going to be an uphill struggle for those of us who do know how important it is to kind of reverse that trend. And if you look back at medieval times, the pillars of education were maths, music, philosophy, theology. They knew then that pretty much got the whole of one's brain activated, and now music at best is a little tiny squashed thing down at the bottom, or at worst axed altogether. So yeah, I could have spoken for hours, but I tried to keep it tried to keep it quick.
Well, I mean, I think we all recognise what you're saying, and of course there is hope. I mean, last year the reaction to the decision about the BBC Singers, and I was at the proms on the first night, when they were there, and there was a little announcement about them, which got, a sort of almost the audience didn't stop clapping. So I think, there is a lot of support out there for the importance of singing and the importance
there really
of
is.
the church
But
music tradition.
the trouble is sort of preaching to the converted thing. My Facebook feed and my Twitter feed, like anybody in the music business or anybody who's passionate about music, is just full of people agreeing with me. But the trouble is how we reach the people who aren't already in the know. I think that was the main point I made, actually. So the prom, I love that story of you being at a prom and everybody applauding the news about the BBC Singers being resurrected. But all of the people in the Albert Hall will have been people who already knew that the BBC Singers were crucial.
Sure. But, going back to the Mass in Blue, maybe there were people, I'm sure there were people in the audience who weren't expecting to be moved and touched by it in the way that they were.
Absolutely.
And maybe, some of them will think again about the importance of music in our lives.
Yes, I hope so. I hope so.
So, Jo, I mean, we obviously both absolutely love the Mass in Blue and love performing in the Mass in Blue. If you were confronted by people who were skeptical about it, what would you say to them to persuade them to come and see it?
What would I say? I would say you will not regret seeing it live. There's nothing like it. You've got the most amazing jazz musicians, a fabulous big choir, a soprano soloist at the front, all singing and playing their hearts out. And you will hear the words of the Mass in a completely new and joyful way. So I would urge you to leave your skepticism behind and come along and see for yourselves and hear for yourselves this amazing piece.
That's brilliant. Jo, thank you so much for talking to me. It's been a real pleasure. I'm sure you'll have many more performances of the Mass in Blue, but for all of us in the Waverley Singers, the one you did with us on the 24th of March will stay in our memories for a very long time. Thank you very much.
My absolute pleasure. It's been really lovely singing with you all and also talking with you this morning. So thank you for inviting me.